And so the discussion is about change, and we're all undergoing change. I mean, the fact that you're here at CBT implies that you want some change in your life, I would imagine. That you want something to come out of the time that you invest here. That you want something. And so I often give this talk under the framework of be careful what you become in pursuit of what you want. So the reason that is important is because oftentimes we don't realize that as we want something and we're working towards getting that thing that we want, whether it's some technical skills to help me get a better job, or some degree to help me get a promotion at work, or more money so that I can buy a home or start a family, or whatever the outcome is, that in pursuing that outcome, pursuing that thing that you want, you are becoming something different than what you are today. Does anybody not realize that? You are becoming something different. By definition, when you finish, no, it's okay, go ahead. When you finish the pursuit and you actually obtain what you want, you are a different person than the person you were before. And what I didn't realize is that sometimes you end up becoming something or someone that you really don't like, and that not too many other people like either. So the reason I say beware of what you become in pursuit of what you want, it's because you might end up becoming something that you never intended to become. So that's the framework for the discussion. There's nothing wrong with wanting. There's nothing wrong with desiring. So again, there's nothing wrong with pursuing things. That's what life is about. Life is about not just sitting around as a blob and letting things happen to you, but taking control, right? Setting some goals, taking control, and then doing something that fulfills you. I feel that what I'm doing has a positive impact on the world around me, has a positive impact on my family, on my neighbors, on my coworkers, on my boss, on the company I work for, on whoever, and especially on you. That's what fulfillment means. It's a sense that you're doing something really worthwhile. And that's what your outcomes should result in, fulfillment. If your outcome results in unfulfillment, that leaves you feeling empty, like there's something missing. So I'm not going to talk about happiness, I'm going to talk about fulfillment, because happiness is relative. We have to find a way to function within the world so that even when things happen around you that you can't control and that aren't good, you can still feel fulfilled. Because the only thing you have control over is how you feel and how you behave about things. You can't say, oh, that person made me angry. The person does not have the power to make you angry. Only you have the power to make yourself angry. Oh, the person did this to me or forced me to do this. Outside of physical force, you should never give anybody that kind of control and power over you. That way, when things happen around you, you can still stay fulfilled and still stay focused on your mission. I'm going to tell you another story about a teacher with a classroom of kids. Randy has heard this many times. And she decided to give the kids a test right before the class ended. So she handed out the test. Now in this class were two kids, two boys, who happened to sit next to each other. One was very bright. The other, let's say, not so bright. And when the class finished taking the test, they would stand up, hand the test to the teacher, and walk out. And these two boys were the last two to walk out. And so the teacher is always suspicious of one of these boys. So she grabbed the two tests. They were the last ones out, so they were right there in front of her. And she looked at the first boy's test, and he had answered 9 questions, and I guess he ran out of time on the 10th one, and he wrote, I don't know the answer to this one. And she looked at the other boy's test, and he had answered 9 questions and didn't answer the 10th one. And he had written, "I don't know either." So I use that story because it's a story that implies that even at an early age, we start doing things that have us become something that we're not going to like. What is that other boy becoming? Right off the bat, as you look at his behavior and as you look at what he's decided to do. What is he becoming? Pardon?
A follower.
A what now?
A follower.
A follower? Well, it's not a cheater. He's becoming a cheater. He's becoming a liar. Rather than put in the time, rather than put in the sweat, rather than dedicate efforts towards a different way of doing things, a more correct way of doing things, to get results, that little boy has decided to follow a different path to get results. And in the in the matter of doing it, he's becoming something that he's not going to like later on in life. May not even like it now. Because why? Because there are consequences. Okay, to leave some destiny behind, to leave some legacy behind, so that people remember you, not just after you died, but after you moved on to the next endeavor and the next promotion and the next job and the next move. To leave behind a legacy, a destiny, a legacy that says, that person was a good person, that person contributed, that person had value, that person added value. I liked that person. That person was fulfilled, and in fact, when I hung around that person, I felt fulfilled. It always starts with a thought. It always starts with a thought, because a thought leads to an action of some kind. That action eventually leads to a habit being formed. Habits are very difficult to break. So actions eventually lead to habits, and if they're good actions, they lead to good habits. If they're not so good actions, they lead to not so good habits. Guess what habits become?
Addictions.
They could be an addiction, but what they become in terms of you?
Your character.
They become part of your character. They become you. Your habits become you. They become your character. Beware of what you want, of what you become in pursuit of what you want. You become your habits. They become part of your character. That little boy who lied becomes a liar. Who cheated becomes a cheater. So a verb becomes a noun. I lie, I'm a liar. I cheat, I'm a cheater. I'm a doer of good deeds, I'm a saint. Human beings are unique. They're unlike animals in many different respects, but this is the one most important respect where they're unique. You have the ability to change things, to not always pursue the same course of action. You have the ability to have a thought and not act on it. We all have that ability. Many of us don't exercise it. What is your name? Grace. Grace makes me mad, and I feel like slapping her. I just had a thought. I'm not going to slap you, Grace. I just had a thought. I have the choice as to what my action is based on that thought. I don't have to react as an animal reacts, because animals can't reason. Animals behave on instinct, built into their DNA. Human beings don't have to do that. Whatever is wrong in your life, you can change it. It might take you years to change, but you can change it. You have the ability to change it. So I came to this country in 1958. I know I don't look that old, but I was 6 years old when I came to this country. Pan American Airways landed in Miami International Airport on June 28th, 1958. And off that plane I got off with my grandmother and my brother. My mother was already here. She'd come earlier from Cuba to establish herself. This is not unique. Many of us have come from different countries. Many of us have faced hardship, and many of us, our families, have made decisions to try and seek a better life, right? To pursue something different. My mother was a widow. She became a widow when I was 2 years old. I don't remember my father. I was very young, and I see pictures of him, and I know what he looked like, but I have very few memories of my father at age 2. So my mother was a widow until I was 12. She met a man who I consider to be my father to this day. My mother passed away last September, and my father's still alive. He's 89 years old. Still works every day. Still gets up in the morning and goes to work at 6 a.m. Works till noon. He only works half a day. My mother and my father saw to it that I understood right from wrong. So I used that influence to become the first person in my family, and in my extended family too, to go to college. So I worked full-time, and I went to college, and I got an associate's degree at Miami-Dade. And then I got a better job, and I worked full-time, and went to school at night, and got a bachelor's degree at Barry University. And I got a better job. And I worked full-time, and I went to the University of Miami, and I got an MBA. And I got a better job. And I went to Nova University. I didn't end up graduating with a doctoral degree, but I finished all the courses while working full-time. And guess what happened? I got a better job. I got promotions. I started working for AT&T. I started climbing poles and installing telephones and repairing telephones, driving one of those little vans back in 1973 after graduating from Miami-Dade.
Southern Bell.
Southern Bell it was called back then. It wasn't AT&T, it was Southern Bell, which later became Bell South. And I spent 13 years at Southern Bell and AT&T, and I became a director level at AT&T. And as I got further degrees and I obtained skills, I was in pursuit of things that I wanted. I was in pursuit of things that I wanted. Not really paying attention to who I was becoming. So I ended up with a great job at Price Waterhouse. At the time it was called Price Waterhouse. Today it's called Price Waterhouse Coopers. There used to be a big 8 accounting firms, 8 of them. Now there's very few of them. Some of them have gone out of business. They've merged. That led to a great job at Ryder. You all know who Ryder is? Ryder Truck Rental, Ryder Integrated Logistics. I spent 10 years at Ryder. They used to be over off of 36th Street and 79th Avenue, 82nd Avenue, in the Doral area, near the Doral Country Club. And I became the first Hispanic vice president in the history of the company. So I'm not telling you that because I want applause or I need to share with you from an ego perspective the things I accomplished. I'm just trying to describe to you the way I was living my life and what I was doing. I was you years and years ago sitting in a classroom trying to improve my skills so that I could end up with a better job, a promotion, more pay, whatever the goal was. I was you. I was sitting in those seats years ago doing that same thing. I became the first Hispanic vice president in the history of the company. I really wanted that. I really wanted that. I can remember obsessing over becoming the first. There were many Hispanics in the company. Many at the director level. That's what I was. I was a director. So as a director, you got a car. As a group director, you got a bigger car. As a vice president, you got a bigger car. This is back when companies actually used to give cars to people as part of their job. I never had to pay for gas. I never had to pay for insurance. I got a bonus. I got my income taxes done for free. I had a secretary. I didn't have to pick up my dry cleaning and laundry. I would say to her, go pick up my dry cleaning and laundry, and she would do it, and we'd be hanging in my car. You know, I really wanted to be a vice president because as a vice president, I would get a bigger car, a bigger office. The minute you became a vice president, you could order better furniture and more plants for your office. Plants, that was a big deal too. having, yeah, you're laughing, but you know, it's a status symbol. It was something to have a bigger office with nice furniture and a nice rug on the floor and plants. Group director, you're only allowed to have 2 plants. Vice president, you can have 4 plants. You know, 1 in each corner of the office. Nice palm, you know, or a nice little Aurelia Ming tree or something. This is what I was going after. So I became the first Hispanic vice president in the history of the company. And a funny thing happens when you start to become successful. You start to get people's attention. And I had a lot of recruiters calling me. And some of the jobs were not really desirable for me anyway. For example, I had a recruiter call me about an opportunity in Mexico to become the chief information officer. Do you all know what a chief information officer is? The CIO, the chief information officer, is the top dog in that department. The top dog. Usually reporting to the president or the CEO of the company. Part of the leadership team of the company. Top dog. The guy with the, or lady, with the stripes on the shoulders that commands all kinds of things to go on in a company with respect to technology. So this company called through a recruiter. It was a transportation company. I was a rider, so I was a transportation expert using technology to improve transportation businesses. So this was a transportation company in Mexico, and they offered me the world. I mean, this is back maybe 20 years ago now. They started out with an offer, and I refused it. They flew me to Mexico. I spent a week interviewing and talking to people. They liked me. I liked them. I liked the management team. And they offered me $175,000 a year. I refused. They offered me $200,000. I refused. They offered me $225,000. I refused. They offered me $250,000. They offered me a house. They offered me a maid. They offered me a gardener. They offered private schools for my children. They offered me bonuses every year, a car, a driver. I couldn't believe what they were offering. I just didn't want to go to Mexico, so I ended up turning them down. But it kind of opened my eyes to what was possible. And what do you think that was doing to me as a human being?
Boosting your character.
Pardon?
Boosting your character.
It was boosting my ego, right? It was boosting my ego. Ego is not a good thing. My ambition, right? It was fueling my ambition. I got recruited to go work for another company in the Northeast, and ended up as the CIO of that company as well. And then that company decided, it was a company that made networking products. It was a competitor of Cisco's. The name of the company was Cabletron. It doesn't exist anymore because they actually took the company and split it apart into 4 pieces so that they could address the opportunities in the marketplace better by focusing each company, each new company, on each of the pieces. And they offered me one of the companies to run. So, what do you think I said? I said, yes. I said, of course. Do I know anything about running a company? No, never ran a company before. I was always the technology guy in the company, the CIO. But I took that opportunity, and I worked real hard for about 3 or 4 months and took the company public. Does anybody know what an IPO means? When a company does an IPO, an initial public offering. So they're going to go public and they're going to offer stock. So a private company that just started out, if I invent something in my garage, like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak did, and I end up building a company, private, I own it all. Myself and Woz own Apple. But then eventually you take it public, which means you offer stock for sale to the public, and it becomes a public company. And that process of going public is called an initial public offering, or an IPO. So we did an IPO. I took the company public. I named the company. I picked the stock symbol. I picked the logo. I handpicked executives. I handpicked board members. And in 2000, there I was at the New York Stock Exchange. You all know the New York Stock Exchange. You've seen in the news where in the morning somebody rings the opening bell, and at night somebody rings the closing bell. And the opening bell is typically saved for those companies that are going public that day. We were going public that day, and I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And that was a big deal for a kid who came to this country in 1958 with just the clothes on his back at age 6. That was a big deal. I became CEO of a publicly traded company that I basically put together myself, rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange to open trading for that day. We had a stage set up outside the New York Stock Exchange. And does anybody know who the Young Rascals are? It's an old group. What they sang, the kind of music they sang was coined blue-eyed soul or white soul. They were Italian kids that were like soul singers. And they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. And so we engaged with them to play outside the New York Stock Exchange. And I got up on stage and I played with the band. I did a couple of numbers with the band. And, you know, we had all kinds of guests there. It was a big deal. I was interviewed by MSNBC and CNN and Bloomberg. And it was really exciting. Really exciting. And it was power. It was all kinds of power right at my fingertips. 2,000 employees, worldwide company, $500 million in revenue. I'll tell you what my salary was. Well, anybody can guess what my base salary was?
$500,000?
$500,000 a year. $500,000 a year. Plus stock options, which made me an instant millionaire. Instant millionaire. And again, I'm telling you these things not because I'm proud of it, but because I want you to understand where I came from and where I got to and what I became in the process of getting there. I lived in a mansion, 13,000 square feet on 7.5 acres of land, 7 fireplaces, 9 bathrooms, 4-car garage, all kinds of beautiful apple trees in the back and in the front. I mean, I had reached a point in my life where I had achieved almost all. I mean, there wasn't too many things that I could think of that I hadn't achieved, but I could always come up with a few others that I wanted. I had collections of stuff like you wouldn't believe. Stuff that I never really used. I had 30 guitars, some of them very expensive guitars. You know, some of them I would obtain them and hang them up on the wall and never touch them again. You know, and I'm not going to go into all the other details, but I was just into stuff. I was into prestige and power and ego and stuff. And so these were things that I wanted. These were things I pursued. These were things that I obtained. And what I didn't realize that I had become someone that I really didn't like anymore. So I'm going to make a long story short and tell you that one day there was a knock on the door of my mansion. And I opened the door and there was an FBI agent, and there was a lawyer from the United States Department of Justice, and another lawyer from the Securities and Exchange Commission. And they handed me a piece of paper. And the piece of paper is called a Wells letter, W-E-L-L-S. It's also called a target letter. And what it tells you is that you are the target of a federal investigation. And they handed it to me and said, you might want to go consult a lawyer, and they walked off. And from that moment on, my life changed. So again, to shortcut the process, we had been having difficulties in the new company making our revenue targets because everybody was having trouble in the place then. This is when the whole .com thing just went down the drain, and people lost billions of dollars, and all kinds of companies went out of business. We didn't go out of business, but we were having trouble meeting our targets. So we did some things that are not legal in order to meet the targets. And I'll tell you about some of those when I tell you about the 10 things to look out for in pursuit of what you want, so you don't become somebody that you don't like. But make a long story short, that was in 2002, thereabouts. And it took 6 years of negotiating and talking, and I decided to plead guilty. I worked with my lawyer and the Justice Department lawyers and the FBI. I'm talking about 12-hour sessions with FBI agents asking me questions in front of the lawyers, and the lawyers asking me questions. And I didn't even want to take breaks because I just wanted it to be all over. You want to take a couple hours for lunch, Mr. Fiallo? No. Bring in sandwiches. Let's keep going. I want to get this done. And I ended up pleading guilty. So I was sentenced just before Thanksgiving, the week before Thanksgiving, 2007. I was sentenced by a federal judge to 48 months in prison, in federal prison. For any of you that may think federal prison for white collar, because that's what I was, a white collar criminal. For any of you that think federal prison is like club fed, have you ever heard the term club fed? Federal prisons, oh, that's club fed. You get to take your golf clubs. That's not true. That's not true. I mean, it wasn't a super max security prison where like the Unabomber is, or the guys that did the Oklahoma bombing, or those types of criminals. But it's a prison, which means you don't get to choose when you eat, when you sleep, when you wake up. You don't get to even choose when you go to the bathroom. You know, you don't get to choose a lot of the things. You are locked up. You are under somebody's direction. In many cases, somebody that is about 12 levels of intelligence below you. But you have to put up with their BS because you did something wrong and you're in prison. So I went to prison January 4th, 2008. I stepped into the federal penitentiary in Miami. And when I stepped, my family drove me there. By the way, I became an alcoholic in the process. So when I stepped into the prison that day, I was blitzed. That was really the only way I could handle it. Because I walked into the prison, and my wife and children accompanied me, and the guard that processed me allowed me to say goodbye. And the only thing he would let me keep was my wedding band. Everything else, I couldn't keep my watch, And he said to my wife, all the clothes he's wearing, I will pack them up and they will be shipped back to you. So he allowed me to say goodbye. And I recall standing there with the guard while they walked out the door, and I saw them through a window walk through the parking lot and get into their car and drive away. And that was the last contact I had with them for about 30 days, because that's how long it takes for you to be able to get phone privileges and mail privileges and visitation privileges and all those things. And I didn't serve 48 months because I actually got time off for good behavior. Yay! And I got time off for going into an alcoholics program, and I ended up serving 27 months in the prison and 6 months in the halfway house. Mm-hmm. So you talk about crash and burn. You talk about all of a sudden your life as you know it, this great life that you had built with all of these things that you were trying to achieve and trying to collect, and it being over instantly like that. And I'm sitting there right alongside all kinds of people from all walks of life, many of them just like me, that made a mistake and were paying for the mistake. But there were a lot of people like doctors, lawyers. There was CEOs of big companies. There were mayors, city council members. And then, there were regular run-of-the-mill criminals too that were involved in whether it's Medicare fraud or drug trafficking, cocaine, marijuana, steroids, guys that were selling steroids. One guy that was caught diving for lobsters in Key West in federally protected waters. And they sentenced him to 6 months in a federal prison. So anyway, what happened was I became somebody that I didn't like in pursuit of what I wanted. So I had a lot of time to think about what happened while I was in prison. You get up at 6 in the morning, that's when the lights come on. So like I said, you can't decide when to get up. You're going to be told when to get up. And then you're going to go work. And you're going to go to work for 6 to 8 cents, 10 cents an hour. That's what they pay you to work in a federal prison. Whether you work in the kitchen, or whether you work cutting the grass, or whether you're lucky enough to go get a job in the prison library or teaching. I ended up eventually being able to teach other prisoners about finances and about how to manage your money and about credit, because many of them had been in prison so long they didn't have credit anymore, they didn't have a driver's license, they didn't even know what they were going to do when they got out and how they were going to establish these things and how these things worked. Whether they were going to be able to buy a house, and some of them were alone. Nobody would come visit them. So I was able to try and give back some of my skills and my experience and my knowledge to people who really needed it. But you're told what to do, when to get up, when to go to bed. And so when my head hit the pillow at 10 o'clock at night, because that's when lights would go out, I did a lot of thinking. And I got a chance to talk to a lot of people. Why are you in here? And you can't start off a conversation with a fellow prisoner by asking, why are you in here? Because people get suspicious of you right away. But as you develop relationships there, because you have to live, you have to interact, you end up learning a lot about people and about life and about what happened to them and how it happened to them. After consulting with a lot of other folks, I find commonality there. 10 things that led me to what happened to me. That 10 things that if I had paid attention to them, I could have avoided the things that happened to me. I'm going to share them with you. No charge. Just my experience. Take it for what it's worth. Okay, so they're not in any real apparent order except number one. Number one is, in fact, I think the most important one. So can anybody guess what the number one thing would be that got me in trouble? Ego. Ego. I'm calling it something else, but it's directly related to ego. It starts with a P. It's all over the Bible. It's the number one sin, according to the Bible. Pride. Pride, which is part of ego, right? Ego. If I'm egotistical, I'm prideful. Pride. And you can find other words for it too, like arrogance. Arrogance is another word. What's the opposite of pride? Humility, right? Being humble is the opposite of pride. There is no price for humility. Humility is priceless. In today's world, being humble, it doesn't mean, being helpless. It means focusing on the important things in life and not focusing on ego. That's priceless. If you can ever get to a point where you are showing humility without thinking about it, because the minute you start to think you're humble, you're actually not. Right? But the minute you start living your life a certain way where you are exhibiting humility, you're going to attract all kinds of positive things to you. So pride and arrogance was the very first thing that got me in trouble. Pride is like an emotional illness. Recognize that they're a potential influencer and make the decision that you're going to accept the influence. Don't just let it happen to you without even realizing it. Third is, so that's number two. Third is lacking integrity. So leaders have to have two traits in order for people to follow them. Two traits. One trait is that they have to be competent. They have to have skills. Why would you follow somebody that's incompetent? Because you can see they're not bad people. They're not immoral people. They just aren't competent. They don't have skills. So you're not going to, if somebody is showing you how to fix a car and you can see that they're incompetent, you're not going to follow them because they're incompetent. They don't have the skills. That's the number one thing. The number two thing, which is even more important, integrity. They have to have integrity. Because even if they're highly skilled, if they don't have integrity, you're not going to follow them. You cannot follow, unless you don't have integrity yourself, you're not going to follow somebody that doesn't have integrity. Why? Because you cannot trust them to do the right thing. I didn't demonstrate integrity. I demonstrated a lack of integrity. So who followed me when I demonstrated a lack of integrity? Who followed me? Nobody. Oh yes, I had people following me. People without integrity followed me. The people with integrity didn't follow me. And some of them just didn't say anything. Some of them just resigned and left and went on their way. So lacking integrity. I didn't have integrity. The fourth thing, I majored in minor things. So right, you go to college and you have a major and you might even have a minor. You're going through life and you're doing things and you're not focusing on the major things. The major things of importance. There's a man who's passed away now who was a great influence in my life. He's been a great influence in millions of people's lives. He used to talk about majoring in minor things. He used to talk about that there's only a handful of things that are really important to focus on in any area of your life if you care to. There's not 100. There's not 50. There's not 15. There's not even 10. There's 6 things that you can really say are the important things in any area of your life that you get to pick that make most of the difference in your life. And you ought to major in those and ignore the rest. Because the minute you start focusing on the minor things, the major things eat your lunch. They eat your lunch. Okay. Neglect was another area that got me. I neglected, in some cases, those major things, but I also neglected other parts of my life, whether it's my family or whether it was parts of the business that I was CEO of. I neglected them. And when you neglect something, what happens? You plant a garden. What's that?
Consequences.
Consequences, right? You plant a garden, and you start to neglect the garden. And what happens? The weeds take over. The bugs take over. The stuff starts to die. You cannot neglect an important part of your life and not expect consequences. And you can't do it all, so you have to pick the major things. But if that garden is important to you, you can't neglect it. You've got to nurture it. You've got to take care of it. Or you're going to have consequences. You're going to become something that you don't want to become if you neglect major portions of your life. Values. Any system, whether it's a company or a family, any organizational structure, has to have values, whether they're stated or not. And we lack values. I didn't set an agenda with values for the company that I was running, and therefore people didn't really understand how to behave and didn't know that they should behave a certain way, that certain behaviors were unacceptable. Society has values. We can't molest children. That's a value that society has. And if you do, there's consequences. You can't steal things from people. That's a value that society has. Because when you do, there have to be consequences. So setting a value agenda for the company or for your family or for yourself is really important. And failure to do that usually leads you down the wrong path because you don't have the roadmap. Values are the roadmap that show you how to act in certain situations. I have a choice. I have a business deal. This deal is causing me to do something a little shady, a little messy. This deal is not. I examine my values and I say, I'm not going down this path. It's like somebody knocks at your door, your neighbor, and says, hey, I got a couple of illegal cable boxes here. You want one? What does your value system tell you? It won't hurt anybody, but I'm stealing. Cable company, those are a bunch of thieves anyway. They deserve it. I'm going to steal from them. No, your value agenda, your values would say, no, because that's wrong. I remember my uncle coming over to my dad's right after a hurricane, and he said, hey, the insurance adjuster just finished at my house, and I have this old mattress that I found in a junk pile. I took it over to my house, and I gave him a bill for somebody gave me a receipt for a fixed window, and I showed it to him. I told him the window had cracked, the water had come in and ruined the mattress, and he gave me $250 for the mattress and $100 to fix the window. Here, take the mattress and you can do the same. And my father said no. Because he had values. He said, no, take the mattress and take it away. He had values. You got to have values. Next one. Anybody remember Ronald Reagan? Ronald Reagan used to say, trust, but verify. Trust, but verify. What did I do? I blindly trusted. I blindly trusted people I put in place to do the right thing. And in many cases, they didn't do the right thing. So, shame on them for not doing the right thing. Shame on me for not verifying what they were doing and trusting them right off the bat. I hired a guy who became the executive vice president of marketing. 6 months into the job, I found out that he had used company money to buy not one, but 2 Porsche 911s. One for him and one for his girlfriend. Using company money. Fired him. But if I had only verified what he was doing so that I could figure out that he was in fact someone I could trust, I didn't do that. I blindly trusted. And I never tested or checked in with him on what he was doing and how he was doing it to make sure that he was trustworthy. Has anybody ever heard the term spin doctoring? You know what a spin doctor is?
It makes something bad seem good, right?
Well,
they rephrase it.
Exactly. They rephrase. You ask me a question and I spin the answer. I spin it because the real answer is not good. The real, hey, how are you doing on your sales quotas this quarter, Mr. CEO? I'm not going to tell you the truth, because if I tell you the truth, what's going to happen to my stock? It's going to go down. So I'm going to spin it. Well, we're seeing a little softness in the first month of the quarter, but we've got some good plans in place and I spin it. Like, remember what happened to Tylenol when somebody went in and put some stuff in Tylenol bottles? What did Tylenol do? Immediately. They recalled it. No questions asked. It was only a small group. They recalled it, took it off the shelves. They didn't spin it. They dealt with it. Straightforward, honestly, with integrity. And what happened to that company's stock, Johnson & Johnson? What happened to their stock? It went up. Because people realized this company has integrity. This company has values. This company we can trust. This company we can follow. We can trust them to do the right thing. And so, very important part of business is, I think, is being totally transparent and not spin doctoring. Now, I can tell you this. You asked me about, what about this new product that you guys are developing? And I say to you, we're not ready to talk about that. Why? Because we don't want our competitors to find out before we hit the market with the product. So at this moment, I can't make any comment on that. I haven't spun it, and I haven't lied. What I told you is, hey, I'm not going to answer that question, and I have good, legitimate business reasons for answering the question. But I'm not spinning it. Because spin doctrine usually leads to obfuscating or hiding or ending up going down a wrong path because of something that you said to change somebody's perception. Okay, number 9, short-term thinking. Short-term thinking means I'm not looking ahead. I'm just trying to get something done today. And there's nothing wrong with focusing on today. I'm a huge believer in living in the present, not living in the future because you can't live in the future, and not living in the past because you can't live in the past. You can't change the past, and you cannot change the future. What you can do by living in the present is influence the future. I'll give you an example. Anybody that knows baseball. Okay, and I'll ask a question first. When is a home run a home run? No, it's not when it's hit.
Oh, when it goes over the fence.
When it goes over the fence, and actually when the batter circles the bases and steps on home plate, that's when it's a home run, when it goes over the fence. Because a lot of things can happen to that ball in between the time it hits the bat and it goes over the fence. A gust of wind can come up and blow it into the fielder's glove, or the fielder can make a spectacular catch, or you can be like Dave Winfield and you can hit a seagull. And the ball never reaches the fence. So that's a very important distinction to make, that the future home run is actually in the future, But what happens in the present directly influences the future. What happens in the present for that home run to occur? You get the ball. Exactly, right? Ball, bat has to meet ball just in the right place with enough force for you to have a chance of that being a home run. You got to live in the present. You can't be thinking short term. You can't be living in the future. You can't be living in the past. But you also have to understand that your actions today are what's going to drive results later on. And then finally, the last one is shortcuts. Shortcuts. I took a lot of shortcuts in my life. Do you guys get tested here? How often do you have tests? Regularly. So like once a week? Or how about major tests for a course you're taking?
Twice.
Twice during the life of the course, right? And you know when they're going to be?
Usually, yes.
Yeah, usually you know. Right? So when do you start studying for those tests? The night before? Hey, you're no different than I was. The night before. Right? What is that called? A shortcut. That's a shortcut. That's a shortcut. Because what happens? Are you going to retain that knowledge 2 years from now? No, you're just going to pass a test. Instead, if you did the work, if you put in the time all the way through up to when you know the test is going to be given, you'd actually master the subject matter. And the test would be a byproduct of you demonstrating the mastery of your subject matter. It wouldn't be a shortcut that you crammed for in order to get a grade that you then forgot a year later or 2 years later. You know, I take 137th Avenue a lot on my way south, and there's a intersection there, Coral Way and 137th Avenue. There's a Shell station there. There's a Burger King next to the Shell station. There's the East Las Canarias on the other corner. Some of you are aware of that, right? Yeah. So what I see people do a lot of times is when they see that the light's going to turn red, they turn into the Burger King parking lot or the Walgreens parking lot. And instead of waiting for the light then turning right on Coral Way, they then go around the parking lot and turn right outside the parking lot. And that is called a shortcut. And guess what it is? Illegal. Illegal. See, when you start to try and predict what you can get away with or not, and take a shortcut, you're playing with fire. What's the speed limit on I-75?
55.
55, 70. Let's pick a number.
75?
Okay, let's pick 75. I don't care what it really is, but let's pick 75. When can you guarantee you'll be pulled over by a trooper?
85.
At 85. Okay. Does everybody agree with that? When can you guarantee that you will be pulled over by a trooper?
When you fly by the trooper.
When you fly by the trooper. So what speed would you have to be going, thank you, by the trooper
Well, from
to
experience,
guarantee?
I was doing 105.
105?
I was doing 105 and I got pulled over
Okay.
on I-75.
So, but my question is, when can you guarantee that you will be pulled over by the trooper? You cannot guarantee.
It's only 10 miles over.
Can you be 10 miles over?
10
Can-
miles over the speed limit, you can get pulled over.
Okay, but I'm asking you a very specific question. When can you guarantee that you will be pulled over by the trooper?
When you go over 70 miles per hour.
70, you cannot guarantee, right? Which means that technically that trooper could pull you over at 76 miles an hour. And so be aware, as you pursue the things that you want, be aware of the fact that you are becoming something different, someone different than who you are today. Be aware of that. Actually, the most fulfilling thing about anything I have ever pursued is not what I was pursuing. Well, the most fulfilling thing was the journey. It wasn't the destination that was the most fulfilling. It was the journey. It was the getting there. Because the getting there is what ended up making me a better person than what I was. The getting there was where all the experiences came from. Not just getting the outcome, but the journey. So pay attention to the journey for two reasons. Why? One is it definitely adds to who you are. and can lead to huge amounts of fulfillment. And two, it is leading to you becoming something different than you are today. And hopefully what it will be is somebody a lot better than where you were yesterday. That's my story. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to